Then you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. We'll start with a check of the top headlines this hour. Ukrainian, US and Russian officials to hold security talks in the UAE on Friday, the Kremlin confirms, following a meeting of top US negotiators with President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. US President Donald Trump withdraws invite for Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney to join his newly constituted vote of peace for Gaza. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says he and US President Donald Trump had discussed in Davos how the transatlantic alliance should best defend the Arctic against Russia and China. Japan's lower house of parliament dissolves ahead of snap election on February 8. The announcement for snap polls comes just 3 months after Sanae Takaichi became the nation's first woman prime minister. Taiwan President Lai Ching-te offers talks with Ukraine to crack down on sanctions busting after Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky name-checked the island as a source of illicit missile components. Australian police intensify search for a gunman who allegedly killed 2 women and a man in a rural town in New South Wales, Australia's most populous state. 2 teenagers among 6 missing after a landslide hit a busy campground on New Zealand's North Island as rescuers work round the clock to locate survivors under the rubble. TikTok announces it established a majority American-owned joint venture to operate its US business, allowing the company to avoid a ban over its Chinese ownership. Viewers, now US President Donald Trump has said that he has secured what he calls total and permanent access to Greenland under a new framework deal with NATO, even as questions remain over sovereignty and alliance unity. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said allies now need to step up Arctic security to counter growing threats from Russia and China. Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen has stated that he still does not know what the framework deal holds, but has welcomed dialogue, stressing that sovereignty is a red line. Let's listen in.
As I said, I don't know what there is in the agreement or the deal about my country that over some discussions I didn't attend. I don't know what concrete in it. What I'm saying is that we have a high-level working group that will sort things out. We have said from the beginning in Greenland, we have some red lines. We cannot cross the red lines. We have to respect our territorial integrity. We have to respect international law, sovereignty. One cannot question the voice of the people. To summarize, we choose the Kingdom of Denmark. We choose the EU. We choose NATO. This is not only a situation for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. It's about the world order for all of us.
All right, joining me now in this discussion is Ross Feingold, political analyst, joins us from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, thanks very much for joining me here at NewsX World. Does the conversation between Rutte and Trump indicate that Trump now has full access to Greenland?
Oh, we don't know what full access means at the moment. There's still much that remains to be done if President Trump is going to be satisfied. He appears to have given up for now the use of military force. It's not clear that he has given up taking full control of Greenland, or if he's going to propose that the U.S. would have sovereignty over patches or bubbles of territory within the island of Greenland. We simply don't know at the moment. But Greenland and Denmark and most European Union countries are very clear. They are adamantly against the United States taking full control of Greenland.
Sure. How do you think those negotiations are now going to take place? Because I don't know if we just played out the statement of Greenland leader who was clearly against any acquisition of his country.
We know that Greenland and Denmark have offered the United States options that are consistent with past practice and the current agreement that's in place with the United States, which is access to military bases or additional military bases if that's what the United States wants. That's not the same as giving the United States sovereign control over those territories where military bases are located. So we simply don't know where things stand among the stakeholders on that issue. We know that the United States is pushing to have sovereignty, and Greenland, Denmark, and most European Union countries reject that. And then separate from the issue of military bases and how many, and will the United States have sovereign control over those military base locations, is this issue of mining rights access. And it's a similar predicament. Is Greenland going to only grant mining concessions to American companies the way it would to companies from other countries? Or is Greenland willing to give sovereign control over locations where there are resources to be mined to the United States, which then in turn would give access to American companies? We simply don't know what President Trump's current thoughts on that are, but we do know, again, that Greenland's position is very clear. They're willing to give access, but they are not willing to give sovereignty.
Right. And what do you make of the remarks that have come from NATO Commander Mark Rutte? He says the discussions with Trump focused on Arctic security. So the focus from acquiring bit of an island has now shifted to the security of Arctic, which US says only it is capable of doing.
Rutte's role as Secretary General of NATO is to ensure that the NATO members are spending sufficient amounts on their national defense and covering the geographies that NATO is meant to defend. And that includes the Arctic, or one could say increasingly, going forward, includes the Arctic as ice melts and it becomes a more contested area. So it's understandable that Rutte is meeting with NATO member country leaders, most notably the United States, and having that conversation about Arctic security, along with the other issues that Rutte would normally discuss when he meets one-on-one or with groups of NATO member leaders, such as the war in Ukraine, for example. So Rutte is just doing his job, but ultimately it's not up to him who controls the sovereignty of Ukraine. Of Greenland. That is simply not a decision within the scope of authority for the Secretary General of NATO.
Right. Ross, do stay on with me as we proceed. Viewers, European Council President Antonio Costa has also emphasized that European Union's commitment to preserving its transatlantic partnership. His remarks come after chairing an emergency summit in Brussels that was particularly called to reassess European Union's relations with the United States. This followed US President Donald Trump's threats to annex Greenland and impose severe tariffs on some European Union nations. Let's now listen to what the European Council presidents had to say.
We have serious doubts about a number of elements in the Charter of the Board of Peace related to its scope, its governance, and its compatibility with the United Nations Charter.
The summit has not resulted in any decisions yet, but Costa has stressed the priority of implementing the European Union-US trade deal that was agreed back in July 2025. Moreover, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has revealed plans to double Greenland's financial backing in the next European Union budget, saying that a comprehensive investment package is to follow soon. Let's hear some of the comments from the other prominent European Union leaders attending that emergency meeting.
Like I said, Europe is not willing to junk 80 years of good transatlantic relationship because of disagreements. And if you look at the surveys that have been done also in America, then majority of Americans see Europe as their biggest ally. So I think this is the way it is, and we are willing to invest our time and energy in this.
Et nous sommes revenus à une situation qui me paraît beaucoup plus acceptable, même si nous restons vigilants. Et donc ce qu'il faut en conclure, c'est que quand l'Europe réagit de manière unie, en utilisant les instruments qu'elle a à sa disposition, et tandis qu'elle est menacée, elle peut se faire respecter. Et c'est une très bonne chose.
We have asked NATO to be more present in the Arctic region. I think everybody in NATO agrees about that, the Arctic states, but also other member states, that we need a permanent presence from NATO in the Arctic region, including around Greenland.
It's important, however, to note here that US President Donald Trump, while attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, has suspended his tariff threats for Europe. He has also clarified that he would not use force to take Greenland. Ross, I'd like you to join us back in the discussion. Now, while Trump, of course, has dropped his tariff threat to the European Union, these countries still want to go on to ban the trade deal between US and Europe. And they're also talking about increasing presence in Greenland, at the Arctic, and also increasing investment for the island. So how is that going to affect Donald Trump?
Probably these relationships will continue to be tenuous in the coming weeks and months, whether that's the United States relationship with NATO or the United States relationship with the European Union or the United States relationship with European countries on a bilateral basis. Clearly, the European leaders, or most of them, not all of them, but most of them are unhappy with President Trump. They're unhappy with the threats to take Greenland by force, even though President Trump has now said he doesn't plan to do that. They're unhappy with the threat of higher tariffs because they thought that a deal had been reached on this issue with the United States last year. But these issues will continue to be contentious, whether it's defense issues or trade issues. And part of that's just the nature of how President Trump conducts foreign and trade policy. And I think the Europeans know that very well. But it also should be noted that it's not the easiest thing to deal with the Europeans either. You know, you mentioned the comments by President of the European Council, Costa, and then there's the comments and activities of the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen. You know, and sometimes people outside Europe say, well, who are all these people and what are their different jobs? Then you add in the Secretary General of NATO to the mix and the national prime ministers or presidents as well. It could be a little bit bewildering who all these people are and who really is speaking for Europe.
Right, Ross, thanks then very much for joining us here in this discussion with your perspective. Moving ahead now, viewers, we are going to cover news from the United States, where immigration authorities are facing sharp criticism after a 5-year-old boy was detained during an ICE operation in the state of Minnesota. The child, Liam Ramos, was with his father when federal agents approached them earlier this week. ICE says the operation was aimed at the father, an undocumented immigrant, and insists the child was not targeted. According to the Department of Homeland Security, the father fled when agents arrived, leaving the child behind. Officials say agents followed protocol and did not arrest the boy. However, the family's lawyer disputes that account, saying both father and son were seeking asylum and were complying with immigration requirements. The lawyer confirmed they are now being held at a detention facility in Texas. School officials allege agents asked the child to knock on his own front door and refused requests to let another adult take him inside. Former Vice President Kamala Harris called the incident outrageous, saying a 5-year-old should not be held in detention. The current Vice President pushed back, saying the child was not arrested, and questioned what agents were expected to do after the father ran. All right, joining me now is Colonel Sanjeet Sirohi, who is International Relations and Defense Expert from New Delhi. Thanks very much, Colonel, for joining me here. It's bizarre if the claims of detaining a 5-year-old are true, although Trump is refuting those charges of arrest. But the larger question remains of the way ICE has been functioning in not just Minnesota, but across the United States, and the deaths that have been reported due to ICE operations?
Well, thank you, Kriti, for having me on this channel and discussing something very important and latest. Now, if you see, the intention of ICE is not wrong. There is nothing wrong in it, because if you see, there are about 13 to 14 million immigrants, illegal immigrants in United States, and the maximum earlier was from Mexico, but now the number is going in favor of other countries also. And this gentleman who ran away leaving his child, he is from Ecuador. So the point is that what ICE is doing is their intention is absolutely correct, but only thing is their method of detaining and keeping the people is absolutely wrong. Not detaining a 5-year child, and he is not the only one. There is the fourth incident which has taken place in the Minneapolis suburbs also. And if you see the condition at delay lockup in Texas, there are about 400 children and all of them are sick. That is what people are talking about. So I think the intention is right. No illegal immigrant should be allowed to stay, not in USA, in any other country, they should not be allowed. But the way this should be handled should be in more humanitarian grounds.
Right. Colonel, do stay on with us as we now move. Viewers, now according to US official reports, a US military aircraft carrier strike group along with other assets will soon arrive in the Middle East. The USS Abraham Lincoln, several destroyers and fighter aircraft reportedly began moving from the Asia-Pacific region last week as tension escalated after Iran's violent crackdown on protests. President Donald Trump has acknowledged the ongoing military presence, stating there was a big force moving toward Iran and that he was closely monitoring the situation.
You know, we have a lot of ships going that direction, just in case. We have a big flotilla going in that direction, and we'll see what happens. We have a big force going toward Iran. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching them very closely. I saw 837 hangings on Thursday. They would have been dead. They canceled it, and they actually said they canceled it. They didn't postpone it; they canceled it. So that was a good sign. But we have an armada. We have a massive fleet heading in that direction, and maybe we won't have to use it. We'll see.
President Trump has previously threatened military action in response to Iran's crackdown on protesters, but with protests tapering off last week, his rhetoric has softened. In an interview at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump has hoped for avoiding further military action in Iran, while also noting that the US would act if Tehran resumed its nuclear program. The International Atomic Energy Agency has not verified Iran's enriched uranium stock since June 2025. Iran is expected to report on the nuclear sites impacted by US strikes, including the 440.9 kilogram of uranium enriched to nearly 60% purity. All right, request Colonel Sanjeet Sirohi to join me back in the discussion here. Colonel, of course, the question of Iran's nuclear program development and its enrichment of uranium remains crucial here. There are many who are saying that Iran is short of just announcing its nuclear capabilities. How do you think that is going to affect not just its relations with the US, but its place in the global order?
Well, Kriti, if you see that last year, when in the month of June, America, they attacked the nuclear sites of Iran.
Yeah.
It was said that there was, like you also mentioned, that there was some 400 kilogram of uranium, which was enriched up to 60%. And taking from 60 to 90% doesn't take much time. It is just a question of few months. So, and nobody knows where that uranium has gone. So if that uranium was shifted before the Americans attacked the nuclear sites, I think the Iran must be very close to having a nuclear weapon, or they may already have nuclear weapons, which they have not declared so far. Right. So this is the total balance is going to change Because once Iran gets the nuclear weapon, then that will be a great deterrent for anybody attacking or thinking of attacking Iran, because then there will be total chaos in the Middle East, and Israel also knows about it. And Israel is very skeptical about this, that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, then the Iran will become more powerful, and Iran will create more problems for the Middle East, especially for the Israel. So it is in the interest of the Israel and in the Middle East that the Iran they don't reach up to that level where they have the nuclear weapons. But if they have already reached, or if they reach in near future, then it will be a great imbalance in the Middle East.
Colonel, the fact that we were seeing in Iran the protests subsiding, not much reports of more crackdown on demonstrators coming out, but these latest reports from the US and its troops headed in that direction, is one to believe that this is really the calm before the storm.
Exactly. But we have to be very, very careful, because Donald Trump, he is the one person who talks very much, but he does very little. Now, in the case of Greenland, he was talking about annexing Greenland with the use of force, but now he has toned down. Similar is the case with Iran. Initially, he started off that the help is on the way, and he was asking the protesters to take over the government buildings and take over the government departments. And later on now, again, he has toned down. So, and now he started claiming that the mere reason of his toning down is because 842 people who were supposed to be executed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, he has been able to stop it, and he is taking credit for that. So, USA also knows that if they attack Iran, then Iran will not keep. Iran is not Venezuela. We must understand that. They are the professional. They have the professional army. They are the oldest civilization. They love their country. So they are not going to take it lying down, and they are going to give a befitting reply to the Americans and the Israelis. Now, as far as the American mainland is concerned, they cannot do anything about it. But as far as the military bases of America, which are located in the Middle East, they will be the main target. And the Americans also knows about it. The moving of this Abraham Lincoln group, which is moving from Pacific to Indian Ocean, and now they are moving towards Iran, it is only a symbolic, and I think it is only to pressurize Iran. And they also, Americans are also waiting that if the protest turns against the regime to such an extent, the regime will be changed, then only the Americans will intervene. Otherwise, Americans will not intervene. Americans will not, because it can misfire, it can backfire, because then the whole Iran will be with their supreme leader, and then it will be a great problem for both Israelis and for the Americans.
All right, Colonel, thanks very much then for joining me in this discussion with your perspective. Moving ahead now, viewers, let's also tell you some news from Colombia and Ecuador that have escalated their trade feud with dueling tariffs, slapping a 30% levy on fuel and other imports. Ecuador's decision, effective in February, targets Colombian goods, accusing Colombia of not doing enough to curb narco activity, fueling violence in Ecuador. In response, Colombia imposed a similar tariff and suspended electricity sales to Ecuador, which heavily depends on Colombian power. Both countries are now feeling the pressure, with Colombia's energy security and Ecuador's electricity supply at stake. The trade war could have severe consequences, with Ecuador already facing a major electricity deficit. A bilateral meeting is planned for January 25 to discuss the growing tension. Let's hear some reactions.
Es una demostración lo que nos dice Ecuador, hablo para Colombia, de que cada vez somos más eficaces en la lucha contra los narcotraficantes. Porque si los narcos se van para allá, yo no quiero que se vayan para allá, pero se van para allá, es porque no quieren estar aquí.
Pues esperamos que no haya guerra comercial. De verdad, yo espero que de aquí a la semana entrante los dos países se puedan sentar y solventar esta situación y ponerse de acuerdo para mejorar el control en frontera. Y que esto no se dé habida cuenta del impacto económico y social que esto genera y que va en detrimento y va a empobrecer finalmente ambas naciones.
Aranceles nos golpean muy fuerte por dos motivos. El primero es porque nos hacen, digamos, perder la competitividad absolutamente contra todos los productos ecuatorianos y también contra los productos que son importados a Ecuador desde otros países. Es decir, como este arancel solo afecta a Colombia, todos los que venden en Ecuador que no sean en Colombia, pues van a tener una ventaja muy fuerte porque es que...
Viewers, that's all we have time for, but thanks for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.